practice our pronunciation. Repeat after me, speaking slowly and clearly. El clima de hoy es absolutamente hermoso.
El clima de hoy es absolutamente hermoso.
Excellent. You got the intonation exactly right. Next sentence. Me gustaría pedir un café grande, por favor.
Me gustaría pedir un café grande, por favor.
Perfect. Your phrasing is improving so quickly. Keep up the good work.
Hey guys, tonight we're going to drift into one of history's biggest what-if questions. So dim the lights, get comfortable, fluff your pillow a little, and let your brain slowly wander back almost 2,000 years. Tonight, we're imagining something that never happened, but almost feels like it could have. What if the Roman Empire simply never fell? No dramatic collapse, no barbarian king walking into Rome, no last emperor quietly packing his bags while everyone pretended things were completely normal. Instead, imagine an empire that just kept going, year after year, century after century, one emperor replacing another, one bureaucracy producing another mountain of paperwork. Because if there's one thing Rome truly mastered, it wasn't conquering the world, it was creating paperwork. An absolutely astonishing amount of paperwork. Even if half the empire was burning, somewhere a Roman clerk was probably asking someone to sign 3 copies before disaster relief could begin. And honestly, that's oddly comforting. So tonight, we'll slowly wander through this alternate history, not with huge battles or explosive action. Instead, we'll simply imagine life inside an empire that refused to disappear. Because maybe the greatest Roman achievement wasn't building roads. Maybe it was convincing everyone that there was always another tax form waiting. Let's begin. Imagine waking up in the year 476. Except, nothing unusual happens. Historically, this is the year most history books point toward as the fall of the Western Roman Empire. The young emperor, Romulus Augustulus, loses his throne. A Germanic general named Odoacer takes control of Italy. Teachers love this date. Students usually don't, because history enjoys pretending enormous civilizations end on neat calendar dates. Reality is much messier. Empires don't usually wake up one Tuesday and decide they're finished. They're more like an old house. One roof tile falls off, then another, then the plumbing stops working. Eventually, everyone realizes they're living inside a very expensive pile of problems. Rome had already been slowly changing for centuries. Taxes were rising, armies were expensive, politics had become something between professional wrestling and office drama. Emperors appeared, then disappeared, sometimes after only a few months. Being Roman emperor was surprisingly unhealthy. The average office worker today worries about deadlines. Roman emperors worried about poison, different career challenges. Now imagine someone finally manages to stabilize everything. Maybe one unusually competent emperor appears. History occasionally surprises us like that. Instead of chasing glory, he focuses on something far less exciting: administration, repairing roads, reducing corruption, paying soldiers on time, making sure grain actually reaches cities. It's incredibly boring, which is exactly why it works. History often celebrates dramatic victories, but civilizations usually survive because someone quietly fixed the accounting. Not exactly movie material, unless you're incredibly passionate about tax reform. And let's be honest, almost nobody is. As decades pass, the empire slowly regains confidence. Instead of shrinking, trade expands. Roman engineers repair bridges instead of abandoning them. Cities remain connected. Merchants continue traveling safely. The Mediterranean remains what Romans proudly called Mare Nostrum, meaning our sea. Not because they were modest, Romans rarely suffered from excessive modesty. Calling an entire sea ours takes impressive confidence, or impressive arrogance, sometimes both. Life inside this surviving empire wouldn't actually look glamorous. Hollywood often imagines Rome as endless marble temples and heroic speeches. Real Romans spent far more time standing in markets, arguing over bread prices, just like people today argue over grocery bills. Some things never change. A farmer in Gaul still wakes before sunrise. A baker in Alexandria still complains about flour deliveries. A merchant in Carthage still negotiates endlessly over olive oil. Someone somewhere is still convinced taxes were lower under the previous emperor, even if they weren't. Nostalgia is remarkably durable. People have probably been saying things were better 20 years ago for at least 20 centuries. Meanwhile, Roman roads continue stretching across Europe like stone arteries. Travel becomes easier each generation. Messages move faster, goods become cheaper, ideas spread further. Roads may sound boring, they're actually civilization's superpower. People remember battles, they forget highways, but roads quietly change everything. Without roads, no efficient trade. Without trade, less wealth. Without wealth, eventually fewer temples, fewer baths, fewer giant statues celebrating emperors who probably commissioned those statues themselves. Roman self-promotion was truly an art form. Imagine social media, except carved into marble, much harder to delete embarrassing posts. As centuries continue, Roman cities keep growing. London, or Londinium, becomes one of the empire's northern commercial centers. Paris expands, Cologne thrives. The Rhine frontier slowly transforms from military border into prosperous economic zone. The Germanic tribes don't disappear. Instead, they gradually become Romans themselves. This had already happened many times. Rome rarely erased cultures. It absorbed them. One generation fought Rome, their grandchildren served in Roman armies, their great-grandchildren debated Roman law. Eventually, somebody's great-great-grandson starts complaining about Roman taxes. Congratulations, he's officially Roman. Citizenship becomes the empire's greatest weapon, far stronger than swords, because people defend systems they believe belong to them. Rome understood this surprisingly well, at least sometimes. Of course, not every emperor remains brilliant. That would be unrealistic. History always produces interesting personalities. Sooner or later, someone inherits absolute power despite possessing roughly the decision-making ability of an overconfident goat. It happens. One emperor decides enormous golden statues are absolutely essential. Another spends fortunes renovating palaces. Someone else becomes obsessed with exotic animals because apparently importing giraffes from Africa seemed like responsible government spending. Meanwhile, ordinary citizens quietly wonder whether fixing the aqueduct might be slightly more useful. Governments haven't changed quite as much as we'd like to imagine. Still, the empire survives. Institutions matter more than individuals. One foolish ruler creates problems, the next spends years repairing them. The cycle repeats, slowly, predictably, almost peacefully. And that's perhaps Rome's greatest secret. People often imagine history as dramatic turning points. In reality, most civilizations simply continue, one ordinary day after another. Children go to school, merchants open shops, builders repair walls, lawyers argue over property lines, Someone loses paperwork, someone else blames another department. The bureaucracy expands by 3 additional offices, because of course it does. If Rome never falls, its bureaucracy probably becomes the largest organism on Earth. Wales might technically be bigger, but Wales don't require 17 official stamps before approving a bridge repair. At least, probably not. And as evening settles across this imaginary empire, oil lamps begin glowing in homes from Britain to Egypt. Families eat simple dinners, neighbors gossip, dogs bark somewhere beyond narrow streets, a soldier finishes his patrol, a clerk finally completes today's endless records. Tomorrow, he'll receive another. Rome, after all, is eternal, especially the paperwork. And as we continue our journey next time, we'll watch this never-ending empire. Last time, we left our imaginary Roman Empire doing something historians rarely get to describe. It was carrying on. No spectacular collapse, no dramatic game over screen. Just another sunrise over an empire that stubbornly refused to disappear. Tonight, let's keep drifting forward. The calendar now slides into the 6th century. In our timeline, Europe slowly became a patchwork of kingdoms after the Western Roman Empire faded away. In this version, though, those kingdoms never quite get the chance. Instead, they grow up inside the Roman system. It's a little like inheriting your grandparents' very old house. Sure, the plumbing is ancient, the walls have cracks, and someone really should replace the roof. But the house is still standing, so everyone keeps living in it. Rome becomes that house, a very large house, a house stretching from rainy Britain to the deserts of Egypt. And naturally, every room has its own opinion about how the house should be run. Because if there's one thing Romans loved almost as much as roads, it was arguing. Not shouting, not necessarily fighting, just endless debating. Committees, councils, letters, official reports, replies to official reports, replies explaining why the previous reply misunderstood the first report. Civilization apparently runs on paperwork and passive-aggressive correspondence. As the years pass, the emperor realizes something important. The empire has become simply too enormous to manage personally. This isn't exactly new. Even in real history, emperors delegated authority. Some ruled from Rome, some preferred Milan, others liked Ravenna. A few practically lived wherever the army happened to be. Being emperor often meant traveling more than actually enjoying the capital. So our successful rulers create something even more organized. The empire becomes increasingly regional. Britannia has governors with more freedom. Gaul manages many of its own affairs. Spain develops its own administrative councils. North Africa remains one of the richest provinces, quietly feeding much of the empire. Egypt continues supplying grain. Some things simply work too well to change. The emperor still sits at the top, but day-to-day decisions happen closer to home. It's less glamorous, it's also much more practical. Large countries today work much the same way. Local governments solve local problems. Imagine asking someone in Rome to personally approve repairs on a bridge in northern Britain. By the time permission arrived, the bridge might have become a small lake. Meanwhile, Roman engineers continue building. Not always massive monuments, sometimes something wonderfully ordinary. New wells, stone bridges, harbors, market squares, drainage systems. Ancient engineers rarely become famous, yet they're usually the reason cities survive. No one writes epic poems about excellent sewer maintenance. Perhaps they should. Clean water quietly saves far more lives than heroic speeches. As towns expand, Roman architecture slowly changes. The flashy marble of earlier centuries becomes less common. Local stone replaces imported luxury materials. Buildings become simpler, practical, less interested in impressing visitors. more interested in surviving another 100 winters, which honestly feels like good long-term planning. Even emperors begin favoring practicality, at least some of them do. Others remain wonderfully extravagant. One emperor spends years redesigning palace gardens. Another commissions fountains shaped like mythical sea monsters. Someone else decides every official meeting requires musicians, because apparently government functions better with background entertainment. Whether it actually does is another question entirely. The treasury sighs quietly, tax collectors sigh louder, citizens sigh loudest of all. Speaking of taxes, they never disappear. If anything, Rome becomes even better at collecting them. The tax system grows surprisingly sophisticated. Land taxes, trade taxes, port fees, inheritance taxes, probably taxes on taxes. Roman accountants are absolutely thriving. Nobody loves paying taxes, nobody ever has. But citizens notice something interesting. The roads stay repaired, the army remains professional, cities remain safe, aqueducts continue delivering clean water, markets remain busy, people grumble, then they pay anyway. History is full of reluctant taxpayers. Not much changes there. Education also quietly spreads. Roman schools become increasingly common. Children of merchants learn arithmetic, young lawyers memorize legal codes, young administrators study rhetoric, because someday they'll need to write letters explaining why another department misplaced important documents. Preparation is everything. Latin remains the empire's common language, not because everyone speaks it perfectly, far from it. Accents vary enormously, words evolve, grammar bends, provincial expressions sneak into everyday conversation. A merchant from Britain sounds different from a merchant in Alexandria, just as someone from Texas sounds different from someone in London today. Languages naturally drift. Rome simply slows the process. Instead of dozens of completely separate languages appearing quickly, dialects remain connected much longer. Travelers can still understand each other, mostly. Misunderstandings still happen. Ordering dinner in another province occasionally becomes surprisingly adventurous. Some poor traveler asks for fish, receives goat. Nobody's entirely sure where communication went wrong. Everyone politely eats anyway. Religion also changes. Christianity continues spreading across the empire. Churches appear beside older Roman buildings. Some ancient temples become meeting halls. Others become libraries. A few simply survive because everyone agrees they're beautiful. History often destroys old things. Sometimes it quietly repurposes them. Imagine a Roman temple becoming a school. Children learning grammar beneath columns built centuries earlier. That's a lovely image, rather peaceful. The bishops become important figures, not just spiritually, administratively too. Church leaders help organize charity, hospitals, schools, food distribution during difficult harvests. Sometimes they cooperate beautifully with imperial officials. Sometimes they argue, quite enthusiastically. Fortunately, Romans have thousands of years of experience arguing. It's practically a cultural hobby. Meanwhile, beyond the imperial borders, neighboring kingdoms watch carefully. Persia remains Rome's great rival. The two superpowers stare at each other across deserts and mountains, sometimes trading, sometimes negotiating, occasionally fighting, mostly exhausting themselves. Neither side truly wins forever. History rarely works that way. Eventually, both realize commerce earns more money than constant war. Merchants become unofficial diplomats. Silk arrives from Asia, spices travel astonishing distances. Glass from Roman workshops appears in foreign markets. Ideas move alongside goods. A traveler brings back stories, a philosopher copies new books, an inventor improves an old design. Knowledge quietly crosses borders even when armies cannot. It's rather comforting. People have always been curious. No empire has ever managed to tax curiosity completely, although one suspects Rome probably considered it. Daily life continues improving in subtle ways. Bathhouses remain social centers, children chase each other through market streets, bakers rise before dawn, blacksmiths hammer iron late into the afternoon. Doctors argue about treatments, patients politely hope somebody knows what they're doing. Medicine remains adventurous. Some remedies genuinely help, others seem based on optimism. And herbs. Quite a lot of herbs. Occasionally leeches. Let's not dwell on the leeches. This is supposed to be relaxing. Even fashion evolves. Traditional Roman togas become increasingly impractical. They're simply too impractical for everyday life. Imagine grocery shopping wrapped in 6 meters of cloth. Sounds exhausting. Instead, tunics become more comfortable. Cloaks adapt to colder climates. Boots improve. Travelers appreciate dry feet. One rarely finds dramatic speeches celebrating footwear, yet dry feet can improve almost any journey. The imperial army changes too. The old legions remain, but they're more flexible now. Instead of endlessly conquering new lands, soldiers spend much of their career maintaining peace, guarding roads, protecting merchants, helping during floods, building temporary bridges. Roman soldiers have always been surprisingly capable engineers. Sometimes they built more than they fought, which is probably healthier for everyone. Retired soldiers receive land. They settle across frontier provinces, raise families, open farms, become respected local citizens. Yesterday's legionary becomes tomorrow's grandfather complaining about young people. History moves gently forward. Some traditions never. The morning arrives much as it always has. The sun climbs slowly over tiled rooftops. Market stalls begin opening. Somewhere in the distance, a baker is already convinced the flour delivery is late. Again. Some things, it seems, survive every century. Our Roman Empire has now wandered into an age that historians in our own timeline would eventually call the early Middle Ages. Only, people living here have absolutely no idea they're supposed to be medieval. As far as they're concerned, they're simply Roman. They've always been Roman. Their parents were Roman. Their grandparents were Roman. Their great-grandparents complained about Roman taxes, Roman governors, and Roman roads. Life continues with its familiar rhythm. The empire has become older, not weaker, older. And there is a difference. Old institutions have a curious habit of collecting traditions the way old houses collect creaky floorboards. Nobody remembers exactly why something is done a certain way. Everyone simply agrees that it has always been done that way. The Senate still meets. Its influence rises and falls depending on the emperor. Some senators genuinely wish to improve the empire. Others are mostly interested in ensuring that their vineyards remain pleasantly untaxed. Politics, after all, has never been entirely free of personal interests, even in the eternal city. Meanwhile, something remarkable is happening far beyond the eastern provinces. Across Arabia, new trade routes began carrying more than spices. They carry ideas. A new faith begins spreading with extraordinary speed. In our own history, the rapid expansion of the early Islamic world transformed politics across 3 continents. But our alternate Rome faces this challenge from a very different position. Instead of fragmented kingdoms struggling independently, a united empire watches carefully. Roman governors along the eastern frontier send detailed reports. Merchants describe changing conditions. Diplomats gather information rather than rushing toward conclusions. The emperor does something surprisingly sensible. He listens. Now, that may sound like a small achievement, but listening has never been guaranteed among rulers. History is wonderfully full of kings who believed they already knew everything, usually 5 minutes before proving they did not. Rome chooses another path. Instead of treating every neighbor as an immediate enemy, ambassadors began arriving in eastern cities carrying gifts instead of swords. Trade continues. Conversations begin. Naturally, disagreements remain. Empires and rising powers rarely become instant friends. Still, commerce has an interesting way of encouraging peaceful behavior. It is difficult to sell silk to someone while simultaneously trying to conquer them. Merchants generally prefer customers who remain alive long enough to pay. Along the Mediterranean, ships continue crossing familiar waters. Ports become busier every decade. Alexandria grows into one of the greatest centers of learning the world has ever seen. Its scholars gather texts from every corner of the known world: Greek philosophy, Roman law, Persian astronomy, Indian mathematics, Egyptian engineering. Knowledge begins traveling almost as quickly as goods. Libraries expand. Copyists spend entire careers reproducing manuscripts by hand, page after page, book after book. It is patient work, very patient work. One small mistake means starting an entire page again. Modern keyboards suddenly seem rather luxurious. Young students fill classrooms throughout the empire. Some dream of becoming lawyers, others hope to become physicians. A few imagine glorious military careers. Most eventually discover that adulthood contains significantly more paperwork than glory, a timeless lesson. The imperial universities become increasingly respected. Scholars travel hundreds of miles simply to attend lectures by famous teachers. Imagine spending 3 months crossing mountains just to hear someone explain philosophy. People have always taken education remarkably seriously. The empire quietly benefits from this. Educated administrators make better decisions, usually. Occasionally, they simply produce more complicated paperwork. Progress is rarely perfect. The military changes as well. Large-scale conquest has become uncommon. There are still conflicts. Border disputes never disappear completely. But soldiers spend much of their time maintaining roads, constructing forts, assisting during floods, and escorting merchants safely across distant provinces. The Roman army gradually resembles a national institution more than a conquering machine. Many recruits never see major battles. Instead, they become builders, surveyors, engineers, bridge designers, quite respectable careers, really. Some legionaries eventually retire and settle near frontier towns. They marry local families, plant vineyards, raise children who speak several languages without thinking twice about it. The empire becomes increasingly multicultural, not because anyone planned it, because centuries have a habit of blending people together. Walk through a marketplace in Antioch. You'll hear Latin, Greek, Syriac, Arabic, several local dialects, probably someone loudly negotiating prices in a language nobody else recognizes. Trade has always sounded wonderfully chaotic. Food reflects this growing diversity. Roman tables become more colorful. Eastern spices appear beside Italian olive oil. African grains accompany northern cheeses. Recipes travel almost as enthusiastically as merchants. Someone, somewhere, invents a delicious meal by accident. Future generations quietly thank them. Not every cultural exchange succeeds. Occasionally, someone insists that fermented fish sauce belongs on absolutely everything. Opinions remain divided, very divided. As the centuries continue, technology advances steadily, not through dramatic revolutions, through countless tiny improvements: a stronger plow, a better water wheel, more efficient mills, improved shipbuilding. Every invention saves a little time. Every saved hour becomes another opportunity to build, learn, or trade. Progress often arrives one practical improvement at a time, no trumpets required. The imperial treasury grows wealthier through commerce rather than conquest. Taxes remain, of course they remain. Some things truly are eternal,
diplomats.
but prosperous
Silk
merchants
arrives from
generally
Asia,
complain
spices
less than
travel
struggling ones.
astonishing distances.
Generally. glass
The emperor
from Roman
occasionally
workshops
tours
appears in
distant
foreign
provinces.
markets. Ideas
These journeys
move
become
alongside
enormous
goods.
events.
A traveler brings
Entire
back
cities
stories,
prepare
a
for
philosopher
months.
copies
Roads
new
are
books,
repaired,
an inventor
buildings
improves
cleaned,
an old
statues
design.
polished.
Knowledge
Officials
quietly
suddenly
crosses
discover
borders even when
tremendous
armies
enthusiasm
cannot.
for solving
It's
local
rather
problems
comforting.
just
People
before
have
the
always
imperial
been
visit.
curious.
Curiously,
No
this
empire has
pattern
ever managed
survives
to
into
tax
many future
curiosity
governments as
completely.
well.
Although
Human
one
nature
suspects
remains
Rome
wonderfully
probably
consistent.
considered it.
Children
Daily
gather
life
along
continues
streets,
improving
hoping
in
to glimpse
subtle
the
ways.
imperial procession.
Bathhouses
To
remain
them, the
social
emperor
centers.
seems
Children
almost
chase
mythical.
each other through
Someone
market
whose
streets.
face appears on
Bakers
coins.
rise before
Someone
dawn.
whose decrees
Blacksmiths
travel
hammer
farther
iron
than
late
most
into the
people ever
afternoon.
will.
Doctors
Yet,
argue about
even
treatments.
emperors grow
Patients
old.
politely
They worry
hope
about
somebody
succession,
knows what they're
about
doing.
leaving stable
Medicine
institutions
remains
behind,
adventurous.
about ensuring
Some
tomorrow
remedies
looks as
genuinely
peaceful
help.
as today.
Others seem based
Some
on
succeed
optimism.
brilliantly,
And
others
herbs.
less brilliantly.
Quite a lot
Fortunately
of herbs.
for our alternate
Occasionally
empire,
leeches.
the
Let's
institutions
not dwell on the
themselves have
leeches.
become
This is
stronger than
supposed to
any
be
single
relaxing.
ruler.
Even
That quiet
fashion
stability
evolves.
becomes
Traditional
Rome's
Roman
greatest
togas
achievement.
become
Not
increasingly
endless
impractical.
conquest,
They're
not
simply too
magnificent monuments,
impractical for everyday
simply
life.
endurance.
Imagine
The
grocery
ability to
shopping wrapped in
continue through
6
ordinary
meters of
days,
cloth.
one
Sounds
sunrise after
exhausting.
another, one
Instead,
generation
tunics
teaching
become
the
more
next.
comfortable.
As evening
Cloaks
settles
adapt to
once
colder
more across
climates.
this
Boots
endless empire,
improve.
lamps
Travelers
begin glowing
appreciate
in
dry
thousands
feet.
of homes
One rarely
stretching from
finds
Britain to
dramatic
Egypt.
speeches celebrating
Families gather
footwear.
for supper.
Yet,
Children
dry feet
finish
can
lessons.
improve almost
Merchants
any
count
journey.
the day's
The
earnings.
imperial
A
army
tired
changes
clerk
too.
rolls up
The
yet
old
another
legions
completed
remain,
scroll.
but they're more
Tomorrow
flexible
there
now.
will be another.
Instead of
There
endlessly
always is.
conquering new
And
lands,
somewhere beyond
soldiers
the
spend
eastern
much of their
horizon,
career
the wider
maintaining
world
peace,
continues
guarding
changing.
roads,
New
protecting
kingdoms
merchants,
rise.
helping
New
during
discoveries
floods,
wait.
building
New
temporary
oceans
bridges.
remain
Roman
unexplored.
soldiers have
Rome,
always been
still standing
surprisingly
after
capable
so many
engineers.
centuries, has
Sometimes
no
they
idea
built
that
more
its
than they
greatest
fought,
adventures
which is
may
probably
still lie
healthier for
ahead.
everyone.
The empire
Retired
has survived
soldiers receive
history.
land.
Now
They
it
settle
is about
across
to meet an
frontier provinces,
entirely new
raise
age.
families,